Last night, my father-in-law sneered at my disgusting excuse for dinner, saying, "Women like you would have been sent packing in my house. Useless, lazy, nothing but a burden." My husband didn't miss a beat. He smirked. "She only wants my name and my property." When I tried to speak up, my husband cut me off. "Don't start crying now. Maybe if you put half as much effort into this marriage as you do into feeling sorry for yourself, we'd have a decent meal." No one defended me. I sat in silence as they picked apart everything I did. Days later, my phone won't stop ringing, they begging me. Okay, so before anyone jumps down my throat, I know family dinners are supposed to be awkward sometimes. Like, you deal. You make jokes, you take a wine break in the bathroom and text your group chat about how you'd rather be watching TikToks in bed. But last night wasn't that. Last night was... I don't even know. It's like the universe decided to show me exactly where I stand in this family. And yeah, I got the message loud and clear. So I guess some context first. There are mornings when you wake up, not because of the alarm clock, not because your child is calling for you, but simply because something deep inside tells you that you can no longer continue living the way you have been. That morning, I stood in my familiar kitchen holding a ceramic mug that had been cracked for months. One I still hadn't brought myself to throw away. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating a thin layer of dust I usually ignored. The scent of burnt toast still lingered in the air. Cartoons buzzed from the living room just like every other day. But something inside me was no longer the same. My name is Lena Carter. I'm 34 years old, a mother of 2, a wife to a man who once made me feel loved. Somewhere along the way, that love turned into duty. What used to feel like safety became a quiet, unnamed distance. We lived in a small house on the outskirts of Charlotte. It had white siding, blue shutters, and a porch I once dreamed of decorating with pumpkins each fall. I used to imagine my children growing up there. I thought it would be where we spent lazy afternoons baking cookies and laughing at silly stories. But the longer I lived in that house, the more I realized it was never truly mine. It belonged to them. I was just the one behind the curtain, cleaning up the stage for a show I had no say in. Every Thursday night, my in-laws came over. They never missed a visit. They didn't yell or scream or insult me directly, but somehow they still made me feel small, clumsy, and never enough. My father-in-law spoke in that flat, unbothered tone. He didn't need to raise his voice. A glance, a sigh. Those were enough to tell me I had failed again. My mother-in-law always wore a gentle expression, but beneath her softness was something colder. The way she asked questions, the way she fixed my hair in the middle of dinner, the way she looked at my plate and said nothing. Each act felt like a silent verdict. And Ethan? He sat with them. He heard it all. He saw it all. And he said nothing. I used to try to understand him. I wanted to believe he didn't mean any harm. I told myself it was just his way of avoiding conflict. I thought he was trapped between two sides. But silence, when repeated year after year, becomes its own form of betrayal. It is another way of saying, I choose them. I convinced myself these things were small, that if I stayed quiet, they would eventually go away. That I was doing the right thing for the family. But the more I endured, the more exhausted I became. That silence started to weigh on me, seeping into my bones like dust I could never quite wipe away. That Thursday night, no one had to say anything. I stepped into the dining room, saw the way their eyes met across the table, heard the soft scrape of a chair against the floor, and in that moment, I knew. I was no longer seen as part of this place. I no longer felt like I belonged in that house. Not because I hadn't tried, but because my presence had never truly been valued there. And that very night, I began to leave. There was no suitcase, no drama. Just a woman who knew that if she stayed any longer, she would lose herself. The next morning, I made coffee earlier than usual. The kids were still asleep. The house was unusually quiet. I sat at the dining table, watching the sunlight stretch across the old tiled floor, and my heart felt hollow, like the air had been pulled out of the room. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I just felt like I was slowly fading, even from within my own mind. The silence around me had become a wall, invisible but thick, separating me from everything that once made me feel like I mattered. Ethan walked into the kitchen and asked if I needed help. I said no, in a flat voice. He sat down, opened his phone, and didn't speak again. Every time that happened, I felt a little further from him. I started writing things down in a small notebook. Every task I did each day. Cleaning up after meals, taking the kids to school, buying medicine, scheduling dentist appointments, cooking dinner, making beds, doing laundry. Not to keep score, but to remind myself that I was still here, that I was still doing everything others had come to expect without a second thought. I also began saving school messages, missed calls from doctors, little handwritten notes I stuck on the fridge to remind myself about the kids' vaccinations. I gathered all these things, not to prove a point to anyone, but to remind myself that I had poured everything I had into this house with sincerity. No one noticed the change, but I did. I no longer smiled awkwardly when my mother-in-law told me not to leave the kitchen messy. I no longer bowed my head when my father-in-law said my cooking lacked flavor. I no longer pretended to be fine when Ethan joked about me in front of friends, as if I wasn't standing in the same room. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I simply stood straighter. And somehow, that unsettled them. Thursday night came again. Dinner unfolded like it always did. But this time, I didn't set the table with my mother-in-law's favorite cloth. I didn't prepare the dishes Richard always complimented. I cooked what my children loved to eat. When the comments started trickling in again, like water dripping into an already full glass, I didn't react. I just looked at them quietly. And in that gaze, I could tell they felt it. Something had shifted. And Ethan noticed too. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to walk out. All I needed to do was stop lowering my head. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of an ending none of them had expected. I don't remember exactly how that dinner started. I only remember that by the time I placed the last dish on the table, my body felt drained and my heart felt empty. Dinner was served right on time, just like everything else in that house. Orderly, disciplined. But the air was different. Cold and thick. Like every feeling had been frozen in silence. Richard complained that the soup was bland, glancing at me as if that blandness was some personal failing. Evelyn asked casually whether I was considering a real job anytime soon. Ethan let out a tight, awkward laugh, then followed up with a joke that made everyone laugh. Everyone except me and the two children sitting beside me. My daughter quietly put down her spoon and looked at me. My son asked if he could have more bread. Both of them were unusually silent. I knew they sensed something, even if they were still too young to name the feeling. I cleared their dishes, then returned to the table and sat down. For the first time, I didn't touch my food. I just looked around. At the man who once promised to protect me, now sitting there, laughing along with words that made me feel small. At his parents who continued to act like they had the right to judge me in the very kitchen I cooked in every day. And I thought to myself, what am I still doing here? No one noticed when I stood up from the table. I walked to the bedroom, took a small cloth bag, and packed a few sets of clothes for the kids along with some essentials. I wasn't in a rush. I wasn't trying to make a scene. I moved as if I were completing a routine chore. I returned to the dining room and gently called the children. They stood up without asking a single question, as if they too understood. It was time to go. Ethan looked at me, his brow furrowed. "Where are you going?" His voice broke the silence, interrupted only by the soft clink of silverware on plates. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I opened the door, took my son's hand in one and my daughter's in the other, and walked out. Behind me, Richard's voice rose, angry and wounded. "This is how you treat family?" Evelyn called my name, trying to stop me with her usual gentle tone. Ethan followed, confused and upset. But I didn't turn around. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just kept walking with a strange sense of calm, like I had been waiting my whole life for this exact moment to finally arrive. In the car, as I buckled the kids in, my daughter asked softly, "Mom, where are we going?" I looked into her eyes and replied, more gently than I ever had before, "We're going home." And for the first time in years, I felt peace in my heart. I took the kids to my mother's house just after 10 that night. The rain had stopped, but the wind still carried a chill. My mom opened the door without asking a thing. She just hugged me for a long time, as if she knew how much I had endured to reach this decision. She made up a bed for the children, then returned to me with a warm cup of tea and a soft blanket. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. She just sat beside me on the old armchair, letting the silence fill the room where words would never be enough. The next morning, I woke up to birdsong outside the window and the smell of pancakes on the stove. It had been a long time since I'd slept through the night without waking in panic or drifting through unsettling dreams. For the first time in a while, I simply felt like myself, if only a little. The kids adjusted quickly. My daughter helped my mom water the plants. My son rummaged through an old box of toys I used to play with as a child. They didn't mention their father. They didn't ask why we had left. It was as if, in their hearts, the answer was already clear. Ethan started calling early in the morning. Then he sent texts, then voicemails. He cycled from worry to anger to pleading. I didn't respond. I needed time, and I didn't feel the need to explain anymore. By noon, Evelyn called. I didn't pick up. My mom answered for me. I overheard her voice, calm but firm. If you want to talk, give Lena some space. For now, respect her decision. That afternoon, I turned on my phone just to check the kids' vaccination schedule. I saw nearly 40 missed calls. Most were from Ethan. The rest were from Richard, Evelyn, and a few unfamiliar numbers. I turned the phone off again. I wasn't hiding. For the first time in my life, I simply didn't feel obligated to respond. I was no longer living to please anyone else. And that kind of relief felt strange, but powerful. That evening, while I was reading to the kids, Ethan sent a message to my daughter's old tablet. Just one sentence. "Tell your mom to call Dad." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and clear. "Do I have to reply, Mom?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. You don't have to do anything that makes you uncomfortable." She nodded. Then she snuggled her teddy bear and listened as I finished the story. And I realized, for the first time, I was teaching my child through action. Not just words that no one has the right to make them suffer just to protect someone else's feelings. I don't know what comes next, but I know this: I'm not going back. I will keep writing the next chapter of my life. And this time, I will be the one holding the pen. A week after I left, Ethan showed up. No warning, no message. He stood at my mother's doorstep holding a bouquet of flowers already beginning to wilt, his eyes filled with both guilt and confusion. I didn't open the door. My mother did it for me. She didn't invite him in. She stood firmly in the doorway and asked, "Are you here for the children or for yourself?" Ethan didn't answer, but the way he looked inside said enough. I watched from behind the curtain, silently observing everything. I saw a man beginning to face an emptiness he had never noticed before. Not because it wasn't there, but because he had never had to live inside it alone. That evening, he left a handwritten letter. In it were all the things he had never dared to say out loud. That he was wrong. That he had left me alone for far too long. That he didn't know how to be a husband, a father, or even a decent person. That he missed the kids. That he missed me. I read every word. I believed some of it, but belief alone could no longer rebuild a bridge that had already rotted through. A few days later, Richard called. This time, I picked up. Not because I wanted to hear what he had to say, but because I wanted to end the cycle of silence with my own calm. He started with the same familiar tone. Criticism, blame, excuses. I didn't argue. I simply said, I am no longer the daughter-in-law you imagined, and I don't need to become her." Then I hung up. Not to win, but to protect my own peace. My daughter started writing letters to her dad. Messy handwriting, but full of sincerity. My son glued old family photos into his sketchbook and drew a new house beside them with the caption, "Mom's home." I didn't stop the kids from missing their father. I just taught them how to remember without hurting. Ethan didn't come by again. I heard he moved back in with his parents, the very place that had once dimmed who I was. Maybe now he's learning how to listen inside the silence I once lived through. I don't need an apology. I need change. And sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is to stand up and walk away from the place that made her forget her own worth. I don't know if I'll love again. But I do know this. I will never love anyone by abandoning myself. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about rebirth, about learning how to breathe again, how to laugh again, how to exist without asking for permission. I've lost so much. But what I've found again is the most precious thing of all. I found myself. Every morning, I started waking up a little earlier. I would open the window and let the breeze fill the room I had begun to call my peaceful refuge. I had found a small job at a bookstore in town. It wasn't my dream job, but it was a place where I could be myself. On quiet afternoons, standing between shelves and organizing books brought me more peace than any therapy session I had ever imagined. The kids were slowly settling into their new school, new friends, and new routines. My daughter began sharing more stories during dinner. My son often brought home drawings to show my mom. Her small house wasn't spacious, but it was always full of laughter. One afternoon, Evelyn called. She said Richard had been hospitalized due to high blood pressure. She didn't say why she was telling me. Maybe just to let me know. Maybe to make me feel guilty. But I felt nothing. Not because I didn't care about the health of the elderly, but because I had stopped living a life scripted by others. I didn't go visit. But I sent a short message, wishing him a quick recovery. That night, I held my children as they slept. And for the first time, I did it not out of exhaustion, but simply because I wanted to. I was no longer a woman trying to hold together a family that was never really hers. A week later, I found a small apartment, 2 bedrooms, a balcony that looked out onto a sunny intersection. My mother didn't ask many questions. She just hugged me and said, "Freedom is not the destination, sweetheart. It's the beginning." I moved into our new home on a quiet Sunday morning. There was no ceremony, no balloons, no one waiting at the door. Just me, my 2 kids, and a road ahead I couldn't yet see. But this time I wasn't afraid. Because I knew I had walked through the storm and never lost myself. And maybe there is no greater strength than that. One June afternoon, I took the kids to an old bookstore in the city. My daughter wanted a book about space. My son went for classic comic books. While they were browsing, I stepped into the little cafe tucked inside the store. And I saw Ethan. He was sitting alone. A cup of cold black coffee in front of him, a notebook left open, half written. He looked tired. His shoulders slightly slumped, like the weight of the world had finally caught up to him. I didn't avoid him. I didn't walk toward him either. But he saw me. And for the first time, I saw an expression in his eyes that wasn't anger or blame, just recognition. A quiet understanding that didn't need words. We nodded to each other. A small nod. Not too close. Not too distant. Like 2 people who once knew each other deeply, but had chosen different paths now. The kids came running up, arms full of books, faces glowing with excitement. Ethan watched them, and his gaze softened. He stood up and walked toward them. "Hi, kids." They nodded back politely, a bit cautiously. I didn't intervene. I just stood there watching. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to protect anyone. Because I knew I was strong enough to be their anchor and wise enough not to slip back into the past. After a few short minutes, Ethan turned to me. "Thank you for not cutting me off completely." I nodded. I didn't do it for you. I did it for the kids." He gave a small smile, didn't argue, just nodded. "I understand." Then he turned and walked away. He didn't look back. I pulled the kids close, gently holding their hands. We walked out of the bookstore, stepping into the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. And I realized, sometimes strength isn't about walking away. Sometimes it's about standing in front of the past and still feeling at peace. I had forgiven. Not for him. For me. Because I deserve a life no longer haunted by pain. And this time, I didn't just walk away. I walked forward. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt yourself slowly disappearing in your own home, please know this. You are not alone. You deserve to be heard, to be loved, and to live as your truest self. This is a story from her side of the story, a place where we tell emotional, powerful, and honest journeys of women reclaiming their voices and rediscovering their worth. We'll see you again in the next story.